With attention paid, focus on the threat posed by the nuclear weapons. The world press seems to have conveniently forgotten one simple fact, that North Korea was a problem state and the great threat security of
북한은
especially South
불리한
Korea.
국가이고
Even
또
before it had
세계 특별히 한국에 큰 위협이 됩니다.
also in these current discussions about peace in Korea, conveniently set aside with the thorny issue of human rights, among others, and also ignores the special character of the Kim regime and its consistent pattern of unreliable promises. The most immediate victim of this strange amnesia, which seems to have gripped not just the outside public opinion, but the voters inside Korea as well, is the democratic or the liberal democratic system of Korea, the Republic of Korea. And also the unity and, in fact, continued existence of the country as an independent entity. The changes which have overtaken South Korea in the past 2 years or so, though hardly noticed by outsiders, have been nothing less than revolutionary. The fundamental belief in liberal democracy is badly shaken. The term candlelight revolution is increasingly used in place of candlelight demonstration, and the stress should be placed on the term revolutionary, overlooked by many. According to the theoretician of the current government, the famous Professor Peng Nas-chung, the historical significance of the candlelight revolution was tearing off the anti-communist veneer that had enwrapped Korea's constitution. President Moon, elected president after the very sensational and rushed impeachment President Park, publicly denies the fact that the country of which he is president was launched as a liberal, democratic, anti-communist country on August 15, 1948. With the help of the United States and the United Nations in opposition to Stalin, Soviet Union. The birth of the Republic of Korea to President Moon and his core supporters is a fact that should be erased out of history, not just out of history as it naturally develops, but out of established historical records and memory as well. And this is why the controversy over history textbook has been so noisy and even landed some people in prison. The agreement reached in Pyongyang and subsequently was met with great consideration by all defense experts and patriotic citizens of the Republic of Korea, with no mention of North Korea's nuclear war. President Moon and Chairman Kim agreed to create a no-fly zone along the north-south border, remove frontline guard posts, and ban military exercise within 3 miles of the frontier. And the Korean government immediately started implementing these agreements. But we still have some 5,000 artillery pointing at the direction of Seoul City, which is only 35 miles away. And now North Korea will have obstacle-free access to Seoul. Naturally, we are concerned, those of us living in South Korea. The lesson for North Korea, or lesson for Kim Jong-un, clearly has been that the nuclear gambit paid off handsomely. It would take an extreme optimist to think that he can be persuaded to give up his nuclear weapons now. It has given him not only security for his regime, but it has catapulted him into the ranks of top world leaders. And his popularity soared among young people both in South Korea and North Korea, people who have been nationalistically oriented. Domestic developments have been even more disconcerting. President Moon came to power by promising to remove or reduce the competence of what he called the imperial presidency. But as soon as he was elected, he started to say he received the mandate of the candlelight revolution and began to advocate causes sponsored by the most extreme wing of his supporters, such as opposition to installation of THAAD or reliance on nuclear reactors. And then the candlelight mandate soon became the mandate of people and was given a most comprehensive interpretation as a mandate to clean the country of all accumulated evils. I keep that awkward expression just to reflect the atmosphere that is created by all this. To those of us who have some memories of living under communist rule during the Korean War, it is ominously remindful of Stalinist purges, the communist purges. And in fact, cleaning up all accumulated evils started with imprisonment of former President Park Geun-hye, together with her core supporters or her staff in the Blue House. And they were soon joined by other people who had served in some important capacities in running the country as a liberal democratic state with its anti-communist past. Now, a year and half, or a little more half, after the inauguration of President Moon, so many people are sitting in prison or are facing trial. I will briefly tell you some of who these people are. 3 former heads of South Korea's security agency. two presidents plus one who is under renewed investigation. And they are also joined by countless others, all very famous names. Sometimes pressure coming from accusations, social ostracism, and threats of house and office searching seem even more frightening than outright legal accusations. The judiciary and the National Assembly are no exceptions. Former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is accused of having lobbied with Park Geun-hye's Blue House. He had his former office ransacked by the prosecution. And a Vice President of the National Assembly also is under pressure to resign from important committees because he had exposed wasteful spending of government money on the part of some Blue House staff. He is accused of having illegally obtained information. While this cleaning of all accumulated evils is under progress at a galloping pace, people have been tossing out of their positions here and there. All important public posts, not just cabinet ministers, but any position that carries any influence, these have been they have all have been replaced by new people. It does not matter if anyone raises question about moral and professional competence of the new candidates, so long as they are safely anchored in the Moon support camp. The recent appointment of the Minister of Education and Vice Premier is a case in point. Her candidacy was rejected by the National Assembly because she had so many counts of violation of law, but it did not matter. Her predecessor, also appointed by President Moon, was a man who said he didn't think really much of having plagiarized his doctoral thesis, saying it was customary in his days. When the sudden talk about peace with North is seen against this background of developments on the domestic front, we have reason to be concerned about the future of democracy in Korea. Unification, peaceful unification with the North has been the dream. It still is the dream for every Korean, whether they live here, abroad, anywhere. President Park Geun-hye had talked about unification as a great bonanza, but with a big difference from the talk that is going on right now. Peace is something that no one can ever deny. But peace is more than just the absence of military confrontation. There are causes which are more important than peace: freedom, independence, etc. Without these, peace has very little meaning. All these radical changes normally would have met with resistance on the part of the public. In fact, many who had joined the candlelight demonstrations joined it, not thinking of it as a revolution. Korea has taken pride in the fact that Korea was one of the very few countries which have succeeded in developing its economy and democratizing its political system of the countries born after the Second World War. And Republic of Korea did not need a revolution. It needed continuous reforms, naturally. But the revolution, as defined, a sharp anti-communist turn, is something that is new. But instead of resistance, popularity of President Moon kept rising after his election, although he was elected by a plurality of only 41%. How was this possible? One was the pervasive fear presented by North Korea that his peace talk naturally had a good hearing. The other is the more important fact. Korea had no fair and free press. This is a story that perhaps few people outside of Korea really would understand. You need a little bit of explanation, background. Because of the sudden division of the nation following the end of the Second World War, the intelligentsia in Korea has played a much more vital role in deciding the fate of the nation than in other democratic countries where there's much greater stability. Because of the sudden bifurcation, ideological and political both, Korea has never been a quiet place. The war, the Korean War of 1950-53, was a chastising experience, so the population at large shed any fanciful ideas about communist utopia. But there was a relentless war of propaganda and agitation waged underneath this anti-communist surface. Unfortunately, President Park Chung-hee, who is famous for his economic miracle, made one fatal mistake. That is, trying to counter this war of propaganda and agitation with total suppression of any literature on communism. He relied instead heavily, blindly on stringent anti-communist statutes. A consequence was alienation of the intellectual and cultural community, which has become endemic. In the meantime, North Korea started to reap fruits of its very patient effort at brainwashing the Korean people in the South. Especially after the bloody suppression of the massive revolt in Gwangju in 1980, the fighters for democracy began to also fall under the influence of North Korea with emerging anti-American note. Until then, those who were fighting for the cause of democracy, trying to get rid of the pseudo-military regimes we had, they were relying on not only military alliance, but also ideological alliance with the United States for their democratic cause. But somehow the notion that Americans were partly responsible for the bloodshed in Gwangju, or for their connivance, that seemed to take grip. So the university students demonstrating against the government began to imbibe North Korea's propaganda through their underground educational channels. The same people had not had the opportunity to learn anything about communism, especially how the communist systems worked, including North Korea, because of the earlier ban on communist literature. So that exposed them to communist propaganda, which they imbibed as though they were biblical revelation. By the late 80s, the gap between the reality, the world seen, and the perception of the intellectual demi-monde in Korea is so wide that when Gorbachev was embarking upon his perestroika program, the student movement for democracy in Korea was captured by a group called National Liberation Faction, the worshippers of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-un as national leaders. It was a systematic falsification of history using the Stalinist method of using history as a political weapon. The collapse of communism in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe was a crisis for the old left in Korea, but they were able to overcome it without really serious intellectual and moral soul searching, because it just happened to coincide with the historic regime change in Korea. For the first time, the former opposition able to produce presidents. So it's a very strange combination that took place in Korea. A combination of total reliance on narrowly conceived nationalism plus the old leftist values. So when President Moon came to power, he had the solid support of the public media behind him. In fact, one might even say that the man who had a relatively low profile as an opposition leader was catapulted into power by the leftist press. Press, because of the limitation on their freedom under the so-called military regimes, was never really totally military, but pseudo-military. Politicization was very serious, and the problem with the press was not their leftist bias itself, but because of this strange degree of politicization, the press lost its independent stance. It became power unto itself and of power supporting one side or the other. So as a consequence, opportunism gripped the media. So by the time I became chairperson of the KBS, there was very little sense of mission that we traditionally associate with the press. So when President Moon came to power, he had really little to worry, as previous governments had, of press criticizing his policy. Press had already shown the tendency to exaggerate significance of any disaster that would hit Korea, starting with the accidental killing of 2 high school girls by American tanks and training, through this so-called mad cow disease scandal, which paralyzed Korean government for almost 3 months, and then this accidental sinking of a boat named the Sewol. The press showed an amazing tendency to exaggerate the significance of the events, so that the suffering of the victims was maximized rather than minimized, trying to blame the government for it. In fact, the scandal over the Sewol sinking incident was the starting point of President Park Geun-hye's downfall. She was held responsible for that. It was an accident, although of a tragic proportion because of the number, that is about 300 people, and the age of most of the victims, the high school students. But obviously, the president had nothing to do with it. Subsequently, the scandal about her involvement with this woman, Choi Soon-sil, who was just a woman commissioned to provide for her personal needs. She is a lady with no family, medication, food, clothing, all that had to be taken care of by somebody other than officially appointed secretaries. That was blown up into a major scandal. So the press was already there as a vested interest in the cause President Moon held up. President Moon is surrounded in his Blue House now by the former leaders of the opposition student movement who had headed the pro-North National Liberation Circle, the worshippers of Juche ideology. And that group is headed by the current head of presidential administration, Im Jong-seok. All President Moon needed to do to suppress what was left of the freedom of media was to sit back and watch the Red Guard actions taken by the strong leftist press union, both at KBS and MBC. These groups are subordinate to the powerful National Federation of Democratic Unions, most powerful political force in Korea. In order to get rid of the president and the board members appointed by the previous administration, these members of the leftist union used any method they could think of. At first, they tried to persuade me to resign, saying I should understand. And then, when that didn't work, they used every other method they could think of. For members of the board who have jobs as professors at universities, they pressure the universities to let them go unless they resign from their position at KBS. There's one-man demonstration in front of the law offices or even in front of my apartment house, or threat to harm those closely associated with you. Finally, They even mobilized the National Auditing Commission to look into the expense account, although the spending record was already public. And then anyone who resisted met worse fate than just a resignation. They are faced with countless charges on stumped up grounds and led to go bankrupt spiritually as well as financially. So most of the, or practically all of public posts now are in the hands of close supporters of President Moon. Never before in history there has been such a monopoly of public positions by a narrow circle of former dissidents. What has transpired in Korea during the past year and a half is greatly mindful of what happened in Russia after Lenin came to power in October 1917. Lenin staged a coup d'etat in the name of the Soviets, ostensibly quintessential expression of grassroots democracy. But it was actually an action carried out by a small circle of the so-called avant-garde revolutionaries, the Leninist Bolsheviks. But not until they secured all the public positions, they revealed their true identity as Bolshevik communists. So these radical changes did not meet with any resistance because people did not realize what was going on. Even if a few people saw through this so-called cleansing of all accumulated evils, an intention to subvert the liberal democratic system which has been developed in Korea, few people, there was no media to carry their voices. The same was true of the huge demonstrations by the holders of the national flag, Taegukgi. They were just not covered by the press as they should. And no longer does Korea have free and fair press. So with the decimation of what was left of freedom of press, no news ever critical of what the government does gets to the people. So this combined with this note on peace, emphasis on peace, people just have settled into this mode of accepting what seems to be coming. That is gradual disappearance of Korea as a liberal democratic country in the name of peaceful unification with the North. Naturally, people with the memories of the Korean War, and people who are aware of how the system in North Korea really works, are petrified. But at first they were too stunned to speak out, but when they began to speak, there was no press to carry their voices, and the pressure of searching into the bank accounts and other pressure was so great that people can talk only in hushed voices. Korea at the moment is like a hijacked airplane. The passengers do not know yet that the plane is hijacked because they had welcomed the new pilot, saying that he had nice smiles, while the old woman pilot was not very communicative. They began to feel now It's strange. The plane is moving in a strange direction. But they're told by those who have brought in the new pilot, everything would be fine. They're only flying to a place where their brothers live. There's a beautiful rocket and plenty of equality, though not much food to share. So instead of heading for their home of freedom and prosperity, the plane is now headed to a different direction. Those who are concerned cannot speak out because they're now threatened to be put under confinement as the old pilot is. So they sit there petrified and hope, against hope, that the control power might really notice what is happening and lead the plane into the right direction. But at the moment, it seems the man at the control tower is of two minds. So I, for one, feel that once this sort of political hijacking is allowed, no matter how peacefully it had all begun, there will be no safe travel anymore in the entire world. We are living in a world fully interconnected, and in view of the fact that the United States of America, this great country, still carries preponderance, influence over the fate of the entire Earth community, I do hope that collapse of democracy in Korea and collapse of the Republic of Korea will not be allowed. And I also urge those of you who, well, I don't see many reporters from this country who are journalists, to pay more attention to what is going on in Korea. Only a little time ago, we talked about regime change in North Korea. Now, we are concerned about the collapse of liberal democratic system in Korea, all in the name of peace. Nothing really has changed in North Korea in spite of the verbal promise. None of the agreements to come out of all these so-called summit meetings is really new. Both Koreas had agreed way back in 1992 when two Koreas had joined the United Nations and the agreed framework was signed that Korea would remain nuclear free. Kim Jong-un has publicly announced to his own people that nuclear program was perfected. They no longer really need experiment to manufacture bombs and missiles. And all this talk about destroying launching site and the experimental site is really meaningless. And what goes on in the Republic of Korea, South Korea as it is known here, is a revolutionary change away from democracy. In the name of people and in the name of participatory or popular democracy, real democracy is systematically destroyed. Unfortunately, the phenomenon of people talking democracy, but really, in fact, destroying democracy is becoming a worldwide phenomenon. And the Republic of Korea, unfortunately, is becoming the prime victim. So I thank all of you for coming here to listen to my testimony. I'm risking persecution from various sources, but this is what I feel is an obligation that I have to meet. Thank you for listening.